Hi, everybody. Welcome to the week two feedback video. This is Richard and Craig. Nice to be with you again.
Yeah, it's great to be here, and some really interesting points coming up this week, Richard. First
Yeah.
one in relation to dealing with pain.
Yeah. So thanks, everybody, for your comments on the forum. It's so nice to see a robust conversation happening and supporting one another. And there
Yeah,
were a lot of comments around pain, Craig, and Crane. And there were, it's interesting because, I mean, secular mindfulness largely, the way it's being used now, it largely grew out of work with pain, John Kabat-Zinn's work in pain clinics. And it really does offer a way of transforming our relationship with pain, which we talk about in the course, obviously. And some of the learners were a bit sort of sad that it's perhaps not more widely known that mindfulness is so effective for working with things like chronic pain, changing our relationship with it, learning to accept it, to allow it to be there without all the sort of secondary reactivity and the fear and anxiety and all of the, misinterpreting of signals as danger, and of course, mindfulness helps to sort of cut through all of that. And I guess it is, in a sense, a bit of a shame that it's maybe not more widely known, isn't it?
yes. And, speaking as a doctor, the pharmaceutical approach, and mind you, painkillers can obviously have a place in the management of chronic pain, but they often get overused. And
Yeah.
the thing that's unaddressed is the internal world and how we relate to pain, how we relate to discomfort. And not just, I think, with physical pain, I think also with emotional pain, and how
Mm.
mindfulness can bring that awareness and help us to understand it more and to start to reduce internally the sort of attitudes and reactions that accentuate and amplify the suffering associated with pain.
We're not very good with being with discomfort generally,
No,
humans these days. I mean, at the moment we're bored, we reach for our phone. The moment we're, go look in the fridge or something like that. So, of course, mindfulness helps us just to stay with discomfort, whether that's just a feeling of boredom or perhaps some kind of, feelings of anxiety or stress and chronic pain. It's kind of the same thing in the end. And so it really gives us a way of just staying more present.
yeah, Shannon Harvey, the documentary maker for My Year of Living Mindfully, she talks about learning to be discomfortable.
Such a good word, isn't it?
Comfortable with discomfort,
Yeah.
which sounds like a paradox, but it actually works well. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot
Craig,
of
some
learning.
people as well also really sort of shocked at how much their minds wander. I guess it's one of the things you really start to notice when you practice mindfulness.
Yeah, and that being a sign of progress, not a sign of getting
Yeah.
it wrong, because and it's a bit of an eye opener to actually realize how much wandering the mind does, and how staying present seems like it should be easy, but it's not actually.
No.
And I think that the point is that wherever we are in terms of mind wandering, is that the noticing of it, to try and not make it a source of frustration or irritation, but a sign of encouragement. And because that in that moment, the window of opportunity opens up to keep going with whatever the mind's wandering off to, or to bring our attention back to something else like our life. And and many learners are starting to notice, that more and bring the attention back. The often unhelpful thing is noticing the mind wandering and then getting drawn into an internal dialogue about why does my mind wander so much.
Which is more mind wandering, of course.
That's right.
Yeah.
Just the noticing and coming back. The noticing and coming back is enough.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And of course, everyday activities was another key topic this week, like a lot of conversation around that, which was fantastic. And one of our learners made a really interesting point that perhaps these, a informal mindfulness practice and paying mindful attention to everyday activities like cleaning our teeth and cooking and washing the dishes and things like that could maybe be a bridge for people who have resistance to or aren't ready to practice mindfulness meditation yet. And I think it's a really good point. I see it all the time. Any course I run, there are some people that don't want to sit. And it's quite, I mean, even that's quite indicative. If people don't want to sit and be with themselves, perhaps there's a, very strong case for learning to sit and be with themselves. And you might want to look at that resistance if that's, coming up. But it's a great way in, isn't it? Just to, do the dishes mindfully because we start to experience what mindfulness is without perhaps having to sit down for long periods of time.
Yeah, and sometimes if there is really something in the background that's very confronting, very uncomfortable, people are not necessarily ready to sit with that, and one can totally respect that, but there are ways of bringing mindfulness into life, and this informal practice in everyday activities can be a great way. And once we start to develop that wherewithal, then it may be where a person wasn't able to sit with it, maybe a few weeks, months down the track, a person is ready now for some short practices of mindfulness meditation and so on. But each person needs to go at their own pace,
Yeah.
and engage with it in a way that is resonates with them, that they're ready for. There's certainly a lot of value to be able to sit with the discomfort if we're ready for it.
Yeah. One thing I've noticed, Craig, in my own life, if I'm packing too much in, like if my schedule's full and I'm really doing too much, my mind starts to get very agitated, and then I have trouble just being, because I sit down to eat my lunch and my mind's so stimulated that it's like the food, that's not interesting enough. I want to listen to a podcast. I want to watch a screen while I'm eating. And I actually use that diagnostically these days. It's, when I find that that's happening, I realize, you know what, I probably need to ease off a little bit with all the busyness. And I think some people are too busy, or other people might be too used to just constantly stimulating themselves. And then they go to do something simple like eat mindfully, and the mind's like, yes, and what else? And so I think that can be, like I said, diagnostic, but then it's also a time that you really do need to practice. You know what? I'm just going to eat my lunch, and the mind keeps going, yes, what and you just keep coming back. And it can be a very powerful practice. Just doing these things informally can be really powerful.
Yeah, and I think the technology is a big part of that kind of distraction. I think too, the topic of distraction has been a hot topic for a lot of people this week as well.
Yeah.
And is mindfulness just a form of distraction?
That's a great question, isn't it? It's mindfulness as a way of distracting ourselves from the real issues in life, perhaps.
Yeah, well, I remember one time running a mindfulness workshop, and this lady said, well, but isn't mindfulness just a distraction from your worries? As if like the worries are the main game, so please, I've got to get on with my worrying. And it's actually the other way around. Mindfulness is a remedy for distraction, the ruminating, the worrying, etc. And it's not a distraction, it's a re-engagement. Now, mind you, we might have physical pain. Physical pain's there. And to be mindful doesn't mean having our attention constantly on the physical pain. We can use mindfulness practices to learn to cultivate greater awareness in a different way of being with the pain. But as we go about our day-to-day life, that sensation might be there. There might be a noise in the background, a jackhammer going or something else. And it's not like we need to block anything out. But mindfulness can teach us to choose in a more discerning way what we'd like to engage our attention with and what we'd like to just leave alone, as it were. It's not a distraction. It's really developing our ability to choose what needs, what's worth giving attention to, what's not. And
after a while, of course, once we start to stabilize our mindfulness practice, we notice that all those worries and concerns, and even just the thinking and planning and daydreaming, that's the real distraction. I mean, that's what you're saying, isn't it? Yeah. That's distracting us from being and from being fully alive, in a sense, I guess you could say.
Yeah, it's a remedy for distraction, this distracted kind of life that we're in so much of the time. And one of the key distractions these days, especially for kids, relates to technology. And
yeah, well, we covered that this week in the course, and it always generates a lot of discussion, because I think quite often our technology can be kind of unconscious. For a lot of people, it's fairly unconscious. And the moment we bring mindfulness to it, we start to see, like you're saying before, we turn on the light and we start to see what's really happening, what's already always happening there. And there was some great conversation around that, and some great reflections around, particularly, as you said, young children. I think there are a lot of parents or people with young children in their lives doing this course, and they're talking about, concerns about too much technology use in kids. And of course, the APA guidelines are really clear. The American Psychiatric Association, they say before 18 months, no screen time, except of course, perhaps for Zoom with, grandparents and things like that. If there's, social distancing happening. 18 to 24, watch high quality content with your kids. Like sit down with them and watch it and discuss it and be really present with them. From age 2 to 5, an hour a day, again, of high quality content, and then 6 and above, setting consistent limits. And it's, I think it's so easy, isn't it? For I know a lot of parents, you know, who you know, it's kind of a lazy babysitter in a sense, because you know the kids demanding constant attention. The parents are like, oh my god, I just want to focus on my own life for a sec here, go do my own thing, and it's an easy kind of an easy out. And it's not that it's bad, but I mean, when you think about what it does to a developing brain, it becomes really important that there are strict limits put around it, that the content's really high quality. I mean, you've talked at length before about fast paced, you know, SpongeBob cartoons, and like I mean, even kids' attention these days is so distracted that you know, people creating TV shows are trying to capture that attention. So it's got to be quick and loud and intense, and it does capture their attention a bit. But what that's doing to the brain perhaps isn't the best.
Well, the brain and the emotional development as well. So for a developing brain, play, interaction with the sensory world, making things, doing things, activates the brain in a totally different way than a screen does. And so for a developing brain needs interaction with the physical world, and too much screen time, more attentional problems, behavioral problems. But for adolescents, for example, a lot of time on the internet. So those who are using the internet all the time, that it replaces all the other parts of normal adolescent life. And some Australian research has shown that poorer and poorer emotional regulation and emotional awareness and so on for kids that are using it the most, compared to kids who are using it in a much more moderate kind of way.
Yeah.
So I think that, you know, probably in the next generation, there'll be much more attention around getting some reasonable guidelines and limits, school, at home, so that, you know, technology can be a force for good, which it can be, and not a tyrannical master, which for many people it's really become.
Yeah, but super important for parents to model good technology use, to make sure that the way they're using it, you know, is teaching their kids how to use it well, to have consistent limits, obviously, and you know, there are very specific times. And to think as well, you know, technology is it adding to an experience? Is it detracting from the experience? You know, teachers as well in a classroom, do you need technology for this particular task, or is that going to get in the way? And then thinking about the quality of the content as well, because not all TV shows are created equal, so to speak. So thinking about the quality, and is that teaching? You know, Disney movies, for instance, are fantastic because they got all these amazing values kind of embedded in a lot of them, and it's actually fantastic, you know, education for kids. Whereas perhaps some of the morning cartoons are, you know, questionable in terms of content. So yeah, so just thinking about those things. Yeah, but anyway, it's been a great, really robust sort of, you know, discussion this week, and so thanks to all the learners who've been engaging in that. Please follow Sharelle, follow the mentor, and yeah, we'll see you next week.
Bye for now.